My name is Tom Scheck, and this is the International Catholic University course on Introductory Latin. My PhD is from the University of Iowa, and my field was religion, classics, and philosophy. Presently, I am a research scholar at the University of Notre Dame in the Jacques Maritain Center. My research interests focus on patristic studies, that is, the study of the early church fathers, and the reception or legacy of patristic studies in the Western Church. I am a translator of patristic writings and have translated some of the writings of Origen of Alexandria and of St. Jerome from Latin into English. The goals of this course are primarily to teach you a brief introduction to the Latin language, but secondarily and more importantly, to exemplify for you how one goes about learning Latin. I myself effectively learned the fundamentals of Latin without formal schooling. That is, I taught myself, with the exception of my PhD program. This is not ideal, but it can be done. After my religious conversion, I encountered and fell in love with the Catholic theological tradition, much of which was written in the Latin language. And so I developed a burning desire to be able to read Latin and to understand this language. I have taught Latin at the university level and at the high school level, and you may notice that my pronunciation is closer to classical Latin than ecclesiastical Latin or church Latin. The reason for this is because I essentially taught myself how to pronounce Latin words and had no formal instruction in Catholic schools or elsewhere. I will try to point out some of the differences in pronunciation as we go along. I would like to remind you that 6 hours of instruction is not adequate to learn everything that you need to know in order to understand Latin. There will be many elements of the language I will not be able to cover in these 6 hours of instruction. My aim is to briefly introduce you to the verb system, the noun system, adjectives, and participles in the form of a crash course. We will spend the final 4 sessions of this course reading Latin texts together and analyzing those texts. I would like to say a few words about bibliography. There are 2 standard Latin texts. One is edited by Moreland and Fleischer. It's a bright blue book called Latin an Intensive Course. This is an excellent text that covers the basics of introductory Latin. And the second text is another classic by Wheelock called Wheelock's Latin. This is the one that I used to teach myself Latin. And this text is actually more user-friendly than the Moreland and Fleischer text in that Wheelock has optional self-tutorial exercises at the end of the book and an answer key to those exercises. So you can learn the material of a chapter and then do the exercises at the end of that chapter, and then also do the optional exercises that are provided, and then check your answers. And so this text is better suited to one who is attempting to teach oneself Latin. Again, that's not the ideal way to learn Latin, but sometimes it is the only way possible. And finally, I'd like to mention an excellent Latin-English dictionary called the New College Latin and English Dictionary, edited by John Troutman. This little handheld dictionary has every Latin word in it that you're going to need to know to begin the study of the language. And for some of the sessions of our instruction in this course, you will need a Latin text to look at for the charts for nouns and pronouns and adjectives and so forth. So you will need to acquire some kind of introductory Latin text. Before we begin, I want to share with you a story from the life of one of my favorite Catholic theologians, Erasmus of Rotterdam. Erasmus was a priest scholar who was born in 1466 and died in 1536. While on a trip to England in the year 1514, he met a very pious and learned bishop by the name of John Fisher of Rochester. Later, he became known as St. John Fisher. Erasmus was fluent in the Greek language. Fisher was so inspired by Erasmus's example that he asked Erasmus to teach him Greek. And so, in a period of about 10 days, Erasmus tutored Fisher in the Greek language and taught him the elements of that language. With that foundation, St. John Fisher was able to teach himself the rest of the language, and he developed the facility to read Greek fluently and was able to read the Greek fathers, for example, and to make use of their writings in his own theological work. The difficulty with this comparison is, of course, twofold. First, I am no Erasmus. And second, most of you are perhaps no John Fishers. But I love Erasmus, and I know that most of you venerate St. John Fisher. And so with these great men as our models, let us endeavor to learn Latin, the language of our Holy Mother Church, and to do so in a few short sessions.